Up next, we have our final panel, Real Estate Development and Infrastructure. We are very excited to have with us three amazing thought leaders in this space. Please welcome Amir Keshavarz, Principal at Keshavarz and Associates, Jeremy Earl, Deputy Director of the City of Fort Lauderdale Department of Sustainable Development, and West Palm Beach City Commissioner Paula Ryan.
I'm Amir Keshavarz. I'm representing Keshavarz and Associates. It's a family business here in West Palm Beach for nearly 30 years. We're civil engineers, and it's relevant to this entire conference, and particularly this panel, because we have the unique opportunity to work on the environment, work within the land and the water to provide services to people that are necessary for society. That's relevant to sustainability and social growth and impact, because if we have the right mindset going into our work every day, then we can make impacts to both society socially and the environment from the very get-go.
Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you today? It's you all are the troopers who have lasted through to the last session, so I want to thank you all, and I think I'm going to approach this thing, as I've listened to some of the speakers before, a little bit differently in terms of real estate development. So my background, I'm a landscape architect by my first degree. I'm also have my master's in business with a focus of entrepreneurship. Currently, I've been in government or the public sector for about the past, I would say, 8 years. Currently, as the speaker said before, I am the Deputy Director for the Department of Sustainable Development with the City of Fort Lauderdale, so I oversee a lot of the economic development activities in the city as a part of my portfolio. Before I went to the City of Fort Lauderdale, I was the CRA Director, the Community Redevelopment Agency Director for the City of Dania Beach, and as CRA Director, we were able to do a tremendous amount of development, business development, real estate development, creating, hopefully over the next few years, thousands of jobs, probably $1 billion worth of product that will be coming out of the ground. So, we were able to really impact the built environment and the social environment. And then before that, I worked for Lennar Homes, which was one of the largest home builders in the country. So, it's a very interesting experience. And then before that, I worked for one of the largest engineering firms in the country, Kimley-Horn Associates, did a lot of transportation, infrastructure work for them and whatnot. So, but what I'm going to talk about today as we go through the session is some of the newer work that we began to do from a social entrepreneurship perspective, which was the creation of one of the state's largest market gardens on vacant city-owned land that's produced thousands of dollars worth of value and created jobs. And I think that's more in line with what a lot of folks want to hear is how does that social entrepreneurship, how does that relate to government, and what are some of the ways that you all might be able to work with government. So with that, thank you very much.
Excellent. Paula, quickly again?
Yes, Good afternoon. Paula Ryan, City of West Palm Beach Commissioner. Before I got into political life, I was a developer, developed affordable housing. This topic, land use, zoning, very critical to my basic business model. And the reason that I got into government or public policy was because in order to do the things that I believe from a social enterprise standpoint, you really need to have good land use and zoning, and particularly in Florida, it's challenging. So as a policymaker, I get to have an impact on what kind of policies and what kind of zoning and land use classifications and the amount of flexibility that you need to adapt to the market. So I was here earlier, so I won't bore you with any more than that, but happy to be here. Thank you.
Cool. Well, I think it's going to be an interesting panel. Let's start out with, I just want to hear a little bit about the built environment, right? And again, as I alluded to before, this is one of the things that got me interested in sustainability in the first place. But I mean, it's something that I think is incredibly important, and it's probably one of the most underrated things out there in terms of the amount of time people actually spend talking about it. It's this subtle thing that You know, people can live in all kinds of terrible environments full of congestion and traffic and pollution and noise and, you know, all of the things that if you really sat down to think about it would be sort of negatives. People can get by and they can survive, but you show somebody, you know, alternatives to that. You give people the opportunity for some green space and to walk and to patronize small businesses and to feel a sense of community and all this stuff that's connected to it. And I don't know how I prove this, but I know that there's a lot more than just your basic happiness that's, not that that's not important, but that's improved by a well thought out built environment. I also suspect it's good for, you know, all kinds of social metrics. It's probably better for some kind of economic metrics, and it's certainly better for environmental metrics. I'm just curious from your perspective how you know, if you agree with that and how you would sort of define the benefits of a well thought out built environment.
Well, here in the city of West Palm Beach, I call it an infill city. So it's been built up, you know, 100 years ago, or it has over the course of 100 years based upon its growth. And today we're looking at a completely different population, different mindset, different values, and how do you come in and provide an economic opportunity for the community as a developer or a business and put it into an infill environment. And that's a lot harder than just, you know, 100 acres of raw land. You go in and you master plan it. You say, we're going to put housing over here, we're going to put schools over here and commercial over here. And in a built out environment, you're dealing with the existing conditions. And land use and zoning is specifically designed, particularly in Florida, to limit what you can or cannot do because of these, you know, I want an environment that, you know, I don't have all of this congestion. So I don't want you to put all of this commercial next to my house. But in reality, the congestion is because we put commercial over here and we put housing over there and we put schools over here. So you have to get in your car and drive to all of that, and then you're on roads that the county, you know, designed or the state designed or the feds designed years ago. And as things change, you have to have that flexibility to adapt to your changing demographic, your changing business priorities. Because at the end of the day, as a city, what we're looking for is an increase in our tax base so that we can provide the services. And as, you know, new generations come forward, they have different needs and different wants. And I'm a product of new urbanism. Andres Dewani's, for those who don't know, brought forth a concept of back in the day, you know, communities grew up around the population. And then in the 50s, you know, we created these communities. We have out west, we have all these gated communities, and, you know, that's not right or wrong, but it's a lifestyle choice. And we're seeing that more people are wanting to come back into the city. And so how do you accommodate those needs? And the new urbanism movement was how to design new cities around those same kind of original concepts. So it's a challenge. I have lots of anecdotal stories, but I'll let you guys talk and give your perspective. I just want to say one thing. CRA, for those that don't know it, it's a community redevelopment agency. We have a tendency to talk in acronyms, and you don't always know what they are.
Jeremy, as a landscape architect, you're part of this vision.
Oh yes, absolutely. So as a landscape architect and an urban planner by profession, I would say it warms my heart to see an elected official or to hear an elected official speak so passionately about zoning and land use and the importance of these things to the built environment, because these things really do drive the built environment. And one of the other keys that Commissioner Ryan mentioned was the fact that we are now in the process of rebuilding the urban core of our communities. So your central city areas, your downtown areas. And so to answer the question, yes, the built environment drives every single bit of the economic development that we see. If you don't have the infrastructure in place, if you don't have the parks in place, if you don't have the correct roads in place, if you don't have the mass transit in place, within your built environment, your project or your city will not succeed in the long run. So one of the challenges that we have in government is to ensure that the built environment is a type of environment that allows us to, yes, obviously increase the tax base, but more importantly, provide a quality of life for the residents of our communities. And this is done through several different mechanisms. And some of those mechanisms, for example, we'll go back to the acronym that you heard, CRA, Community Redevelopment Agency. These are, for those of you who don't know, these are in a sense, another arm of government that is the business side of government. And CRAs are tasked with the redevelopment of the built environment in order to foster an environment in which economic development can thrive. And that's what CRAs do. So for many of you who are looking for areas in which to invest, I would encourage you to look at a map or go to the Florida Redevelopment Association website, figure out where the CRAs, where they're located close to you, because inevitably those same CRAs who are building infrastructure also have incentives that can be used for redevelopment activities as well. One of the primary things that CRAs do, for example, is, again, infrastructure projects. So, I think, and again, Amir can speak some more to this, but, in the CRAs that I've been involved with, we have tens upon tens upon tens of millions of dollars in streetscape projects, and sidewalk projects and water and sewer projects, and sometimes it's not, the nice, the things that maybe, some of our residents can see, like a nice tree-lined street. But without us doing all of these things, you will not be able to have a business that comes in that can thrive. And that's why the built environment is extremely important to development, redevelopment, and social entrepreneurship.
I completely agree. Just as both of you said, that built environment, the existing conditions in which CRAs or cities exist, it determines everything from development to quality of life. And even it determines the manner in which engineers can go about improving things. If the main deterrent from making these improvements is lack of funding, you have to spend a lot of resources and a lot of time and a lot of focus on obtaining grants, going back, getting more grants as we go along, making sure that you meet the grant requirements. It's extremely difficult, albeit it's very rewarding when it does occur, when it's successful. We had the pleasure of working for the Westgate Belvedere Homes CRA here in Palm Beach County for about 13 years. And over those 13 years, we raised about $17 million in investment or in grant money to put into infrastructure improvements, and even managed to come along with a couple of ideas that were a little innovative in a sense. So take, for example, there was the need for drainage improvements CRA-wide. As most people can imagine, drainage or water has to go somewhere. So typically there's a retention pond or dry retention areas. In this case, we decided to install a large lake that was a beautification project for the community, something that everybody that was part of a community that they weren't entirely proud of, even though most of those people had been there most of their lives, or their families had been there for most of their lives. They had something that not only was a direct improvement to their life, whether they fully understood it or not, in the sense of the flooding was alleviated. They had something they could be proud of and walk by and enjoy in the form of a beautiful lake, and then next to it, a dry detention area that was not just left as a sodded depression in the ground, but rather was really thought through and created into what the Audubon Society called an urban oasis, with 72 different native plant species and a concrete creek that ran and cleaned the water as it aerated it. Something that, even though that $17 million worth of improvements was actually spent on infrastructure in large majority, the people over time, they really appreciated the things they could see, the things that they could interact with of all of the improvements that were made, even though it was less than a 20th of the actual investment into their community.
Interesting. So I want to come back to some of the things that Paula was talking about how this sort of legacy of rules is kind of, holding us back a little bit. I think about this stuff a lot, and, some of the first suburbs that were built, were really very new urbanist in their design. I mean, these were places where there was a train station or a streetcar station, and you had your nice suburban home, but you could still walk to the shops and walk to the train and things like that. And then somehow it became very automobile dependent, and then somehow beyond that it became totally automobile dependent and so segregated from everything else that you couldn't do anything without driving for 5 miles. And next thing you know, you get the environmental and economic and social costs that go along with that. So I guess question number one is, what can a developer do given this strict set of, are your hands kind of tied in terms of, you might have this incredible vision for this mixed use utopia, but what can you, but are your hands tied? Can you really do much? Or, is it worth most developers' time to try to change the rules, bend the rules? Who's driving that?
Well, I can tell you that it is not worth the developer's time to change the rules, except in some instances where a developer has come in and put a significant investment and decided that this is a community that they want to continue to make investment. And they see opportunities, but the land use doesn't allow for them to do that. So they will spend the time to try to bring forward changes and educate the public officials. But the reason that these rules have become
that's
so,
time consuming, right?
yes,
I mean,
it costs an enormous amount of money. And so the reason that these rules exist is that over time, people are making choices about where they want to live and what they want to have around them. And so they tell their municipalities, we don't want industrial. We don't want an entertainment district near our neighborhood. And so they write these rules that
even
are
without
very
necessarily understanding, the consequences of something so strict.
And we just had a battle on the commission 2 weeks ago where the planning department, in an effort to limit lawsuits from communities, wanted to put an even more stricter program in place that took all oversight from the commission out of the play. So that's really your last line of defense. If you have the ability to go forward to an elected body who is responsible to the residents and have a conversation back and forth about what it is the developer wants to do, working with the community, you really end up with a much better result. And unfortunately, over time, particularly in the state of Florida, they've created these very narrow, boxes with which you can do this and you can do this. And as I said, if you have raw land, it's a lot easier to do. But if you're coming into an infill community, it's very difficult. So we lose a lot of opportunities. And I talk about that with our planning department. And they're planners. They're not developers. They're not business people. And so it's an education. And I've taken to walking the city. And I walk maybe 6, 7, 8 miles a day on the weekend. And I've asked the planning department to come with me. Let's look at these buildings. Let's look at them up front. And like, this has been vacant, Carefree Theater, for 20 years. We have had this unsightly, building on Dixie Highway. And there is so much fear from the historic side, the planning side, and a developer is like, okay, down the road, I'll go to Fort Lauderdale, I'll go to Miami. So, it is very difficult, and it does impact greatly.
And has that been your experience? And have you guys seen that? And have there been instances where you've found ways to, let's use the word entrepreneur your way to something innovative and different, or is it just that hard?
I think it always depends on how willing the government that is involved is in working with that developer or us as engineers hired by a private developer. we were talking about this earlier. This city, West Palm Beach, it's commendable that they have an art in public places ordinance, for example. So that's already in place as a requirement for a developer to come in. They have to spend 1% of their construction cost, on overall construction cost, on something that benefits the public in the form of art typically.
That's a lot, 1%.
It can be an extraordinary amount of money, depending on the size of the project.
How is it defined? Does that mean a sculpture, or are we talking like a cool sidewalk or something?
Well, and that's kind of, I mean, that's my problem with the with the requirement. I think that, you know, art is one of those things in the eyes of the beholder. It, you know, it changes. Is it an installation that changes? Is it a sculpture that stays the same? Is it a painting? Is it a mural? And you have to be careful with the implementation of those kind of programs. And, you know, I had mentioned the gardens. Gardens, I think, has one of the most friendly policies. Ours, we're tweaking it because developers have walked away because of that requirement. 1% is a lot.
But even still, it's all towards an end desired result.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you don't have an ordinance like that, you really won't ever get those public art fixtures in any form, much less have to go back and forth with both developers, artists, public artists, engineers, with ideas in different formats that you can achieve this goal. And perhaps these definitions could be a little less rigid, but at the same time, that's the inherent problem of these regulations, of these laws, these rules. The only way to actually make them more widely applicable and beneficial for the community is to go through the process, to put them into place, and then to go through the synthesis of trying this and that option.
So, yeah, go ahead.
So, okay, so to answer your question, from my perspective, yes, there is definitely entrepreneurial or innovative ways to deal with some of these challenges, especially from the government side. You know, one of the first things that I did when I became CRA director for the city of Dania Beach was to change the land use and the zoning and write that land use and zoning from a developer perspective. And so when you would come into the city, you know, I mean, to have a land use change could take you 18 months. To have a zoning change can take you 8 months, if you're lucky. And so what we did was we went in and made the ground basically shovel ready from a development perspective. From a zoning perspective, we made flexible zoning in what's called form-based zoning. And many cities are moving towards a form-based zoning. Now it's tied in many ways to the whole notion of new urbanism in a sense. And so we did that, and that allowed for developers to have flexibility. You know, we gave a very specific box, but then allowed the developer to do almost anything within that box. And that's what we found really began to attract redevelopment and development to the city. The city of Miami did the very same thing with their Miami 21 program. Again, a form-based zoning code. And then from a code perspective, one of the things that we did was it's community specific. And so in the city of Fort Lauderdale, there is a lot that a developer is able to do because of these types of form-based zoning codes without going to the commission. But the commission has set the policy, and they've approved the master plans on which the zoning codes are based. Now, if a developer wants to go above and beyond what that staff approval is, if he or she wants extra height, if they want something else, it immediately triggers a commission approval. But what it does is, you have many developers who are quite happy working within the by right, you know, up to the limit of what a trigger would be. And there is great development that we've been, you know, able to get from developers who work within those confines. Now, again, we have controversial projects, as every city does, and those are done before the city commission, and those, you know, the elected officials make those decisions. But yes, from a staff perspective, there's a lot that we can do. But again, to the point that was made, a lot of city staff have not ever sat on the other side of the table. So they don't understand development. They went to school for planning, and they work in a realm of theory. They've gone to conferences. They've learned some things. And so very early in my career, I learned, that I was working too much from a perspective of theory. And that's why I left my job and went to work for a developer, so I could understand what it was to sit on the other side of the table. And then I bring that experience with the urban plan experience into my job every day in terms of working with developers, knowing the language that they speak, knowing exactly what they're looking for, knowing what they want, knowing what's also right for the city from, we're in my city hat, obviously, knowing, that I'm always going to protect the quality of life for our residents. But really, it's kind of a mashup of everything in a sense. And so, yeah, there are definitely ways that we can begin to do these things.
I'd like to challenge that.
Okay.
That form-based code is perceived as something that would provide some certainty for the developers.
Form-based means what? That means like
Form-based, as he's...
fill in the box?
It's like, okay, you can do 8 stories here, 10 stories
Yeah.
here. Your setbacks, meaning from the curb or the property line before the
Has
building.
to be some minimum, blah, blah, blah.
And
Yeah.
what we have found is that developers will come in and build every square inch. So now that's why you have every square inch of that form, right? So as you're walking down the street and you see these buildings that are just uniform in their, their look and feel, it's because the developer makes his money by maximizing square footage, right? They're going to sell it, rent it, whatever they're going to do. So they're going to do as much square footage as they possibly can. And unfortunately, there is a sense that, density is bad. Increased density is really not good for, a community, or height is bad. And none of it is bad. It can be bad. Form-based can be very bad, because it's just uniform and square, lot line to lot line. And what happens is that there's no flexibility provided in, you have to be considerate. And if developers say, okay, I can come in and build this Burger King right here, I've got the Burger King plan, I'm going to put it up here, and the code allows me to do that. And that's great, because every community needs their Burger Kings, and they're this and they're that. But when you're in a community like the city of West Palm Beach, or even Fort Lauderdale at this point, you've got developers coming in, trying to put something on a piece of property, and if they're allowed to go higher, right, and they'll move in their setbacks so that you get some different types of look and feel along the front edge as you're walking, back to that walkability. Do you want to walk by a blank wall, or do you want to have some, variation in what you're looking at? And form-based doesn't allow for that, and unfortunately, I'm not against urban planners or planning, but because most of them are not in the real world, they try to limit the public policy input. So in the city of West Palm Beach, we have a zoning code and we have a master plan. And that's part of your requirements in the state of Florida. You have to do a master plan. You send it up to Tallahassee, and that master plan says, schools, roads, transportation, infrastructure, and they're high-level goals. And then what you do is you put together a zoning code that tries to give guidance to developers, architects, engineers, to design something that is consistent with the master plan, in the effort to control every aspect of what a developer is allowed to do. The city of West Palm Beach has embedded their zoning code within the master plan. So if you come in and you say, I would like to step back an additional 15 feet and go up an additional 15 feet, that is an amendment to the master plan, and that's 2 public hearings up to Tallahassee, and 18 months later, you know.
You have to go all the
might-
way to Tallahassee for that.
In many, many respects, in the city of West Palm Beach, the only thing that I get to look at right now is if somebody wants to abandon an alley.
So,
Yeah.
so, again, I would say every community is different in terms of how their zoning and their land use is interpreted. A proper form-based codes, the ones that I've actually worked with, don't force a developer to all build something exactly the same. When we have the code, if you have a square piece of property, you have your setbacks. That may be the first thing that you do. So you have a build-to line. Then in the code, you allow for a developer to do arcades, you allow for fenestration, you allow for step backs as he goes higher, you allow for different things. Within that same envelope, you have parking, because obviously you have to park it. You have landscape requirements, because obviously you have to have landscape requirements. And there's tremendous amount of flexibility to a properly done form-based code. Because at the end of the day, how it's supposed to work is, and how it actually works for the most part in Dania or in Fort Lauderdale, is a developer comes in, he looks at the pretty pictures that tells him what he can do, his architect designs, is as creative as he wants to be, and again, you know, we also have a master plan. That master plan we shift and adjust and change, but the master plan has architectural guidelines, urban design guidelines. So everything is informed by this body of work. And so, you know, a properly done form-based code. So I would say this: if your West Palm code does or works the way that you said, then in my opinion, not really having seen the code here, I would say yes, there's additional work that perhaps needs to be done. In a properly done form-based code, you don't have those restrictions. And a developer can come in and he can do, and then you then build in certain things. So if a developer wants extra height and extra density, because again, I have no issue with height and density or any of those things. If a developer wants extra height, then he's going to do something for me. He's now going to build extra, so he may build, you know, for every 2 floors additional that we give him, he now has to put in, I'm just going to make up a number, 10 units of affordable housing or workforce housing. So there are other things that now begin to work into the social fabric or work into the built environment based on that form-based zoning code that you can do. So I would encourage you, Commissioner, to really have your staff take a good look at their form-based code, because it doesn't seem like, again, I haven't seen it, so I can't really speak to it, but it doesn't seem that from your description that it's as flexible as it should be, because it's supposed to be flexible. And you're supposed to get good design. There is no developer that would ever come across my desk that would ever have bad design. I know you have to.
What I was going to say earlier, you know, is that all 3 of you have one way or another suggested that there's missing links in communication with all of these different players, all of these different stakeholders, and that there's missing links in terms of people's, you know, experience and education and understanding of what it's like to quote unquote, you know, wear the other hat or sit on the other side of something. This is like, I feel like we're getting into some real stakeholder dialogue here. Do you agree? And you know, let's talk about
You're living
what's
in the built environment, right? You know, and those are different conditions.
and we're have to cut it, but let's just answer that, and then we're going to open this up. So, you know, just to, you know, tell us what's being done to make, you know, it starts with the dialogue, right? If we're going to get anywhere with this.
I think to either of the cases that we were just discussing, not to reiterate what I said, but central to either case and the way it can go, to bring it back around to how, as a developer, you're coming in, you're going to build a building, you have regulations and restrictions, whether it be form-based code or anything else, being able to access government, being able to work with them, how flexible they're willing to be, amendments, variances. These things all result in dollars. And for a developer, that's a key thing. If the government entity that they have to work with either a flexible or an inflexible code in order to create their site plan, If that government entity is easily accessible and easy to work with and responsible, then it allows them to still have money left over to do things like giving you something you want, whether that be going further back from the setback for higher height, or a public amenity, something that could benefit people other than those that are in the building.
Or
And it-
affordable housing.
Or affordable
And
housing.
is even a very self-interested developer that thoughtful when it comes to that negotiation process?
I think you'd be surprised.
Yes,
Yeah, there are.
absolutely.
I mean, there are developers that are doing things for the public where it's not required. And although many developers may get a bad rap because their overall industry, their job is so tied to their bottom line, and getting a project done affordably so that they could sell that same project once it's completed affordably. Often there's a sense of responsibility there, just like there is for many engineers who are trying to design infrastructure or retrofit infrastructure in innovative ways that aren't just to get the job done. I mean, yes, we have to do this in order to be able to develop or redevelop an area, but the manner in which it's approached is very important. And as a consultant who sells services based on units of time, spending more time to come up with more thought through proposed solutions has a direct cost.
Right, time is money. And there is no other field that I have ever been in that is more impacted by time and cost.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Agreed.
We got 4 minutes or something left, so, but I would like just final thoughts on that, on this dialogue thing. I mean, you know, what efforts being made to connect these dots that we kind of talked about? And then whoever has a question, raise your hand, I'll call on you as soon as we're done with that.
Well,
But-
I don't want to redirect from your question too much, but in the sense of efforts being made, I think we as a nation have woken up to our overall infrastructure condition and the monumental task that's in front of us in fixing a lot of our aged infrastructure. And since we started that as a prerequisite for development and redevelopment, it's critical to discuss that focus needs to be maintained. And since there is a lot of federal funding and a lot of municipal funding and focus on repairing old systems that are in disrepair, the way it can benefit not just developers, but the public who are impacted by developers is, which would you consider, of two fictional communities, which would you consider to be a better functioning community? One that has clean drinking water, or one that is drinking through a infrastructure system that's old and decaying, and they're inevitably affected by the negative effects of that infrastructure decaying. So since we're talking about drinking water, a healthy community directly related to various things, but let's just say drinking water for the purpose of the conversation, or a less healthy community. The assumption is a more healthy community, correct? So focusing on that not only helps the community directly, but it helps developers not have to work as hard or spend as much of their very finite, very important budget on getting what you want and what they want within budget.
Yeah, there has been no funding on our infrastructure in the last, I don't know, 20 years. And, you know, we're seeing the impacts of that all over this country. And that's policy. And, you know, the policymakers in DC have neglected to make that a priority. If we focus funding on our infrastructure, we can see our jobs numbers go way up. We can see our educational, meaningful education. My son graduated in 2009. He's still trying to figure out what to do with that degree, in this economy, in today's world. And the infrastructure is the basic bottom line in order for good development, and you have to have that. And when you're working in a built-out environment, you're dealing with upgrading that infrastructure. And if the municipality doesn't have the money to do it, the developer ends up doing it, or they move to some place where that is, where a municipality is doing that and making that a priority. So there's a lot on the ground that government needs to do and must do in order to attract that good and positive development. And, you know, I threw out affordable housing. You know, we talk in this community about the need for workforce affordable housing, or housing for mere mortals, as I like to describe it. And we actually do things on a policy side that are completely antithesis to that, the creation of that. And, you know, and I sit up there and I'm like going, I'm sorry, weren't you really interested in affordable housing? This just now, you know, will limit the ability to do that. So it's education, it's making that commitment, and, you know, people like you asking those questions. And saying that
Realistic
that's what we
policy.
want.
Good.
Yes,
Correct?
yeah.
Yeah. Well, guys, this has been terrific. I'm getting the signal that it's time to wrap it up. And so thanks a million for joining us today. And we do have time. We do have time for Q&A. All right, we do have time for Q&A. All right, guys, this is it. This is your last chance. Right there.
I really appreciate your comments, and I feel the frustration. I really feel the frustration. I mean, there's a system in place that's supposed to be working for us, it's working against us. So what can we as citizens, I live in Lake Worth, West Palm area, what can we do to make a change? Because people make promises when they run for office, and then they get in there and they're self-serving. So do you have any suggestions on how changes can be made, some solutions in light?
Well, these are complicated problems, and when you're running for office, people don't want to listen to complicated answers. They're looking for sound bites. They're looking for that which, you know, will make somebody feel good and then go out. You know, my perspective is that, you know, we should be asking a lot more of our public officials than what I think we have in a very long time. And the public has to be patient. The public has to be willing to listen to what the answer is and be willing to make an investment. We're talking about investment, social, you know, impact investment. You know, your traditional stock market, if you're not making money in 3, 6, 9 months, you know, on to the next. And you have to be patient, and you have to know that that return is going to come from making those investments early on and staying the course. And, you know, an engaged population is a better end result.
Can I add
Yeah.
to that? One of the things that you can do as a resident of your community is you can begin to demand, in a sense, that your elected officials do a strategic vision and plan for the city. And what these types of plans do is, it, in a sense, puts all of the electeds on the hook for what they see as the vision that's going to happen over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So the city of Fort Lauderdale did this. And then you now tie your initiatives to that vision. And that vision now, because of the length of time, so for example, in Fort Lauderdale, we have a 2018 vision, but the ultimate was a 2035. And our 2018 was really only our 5-year benchmark for that vision. And all of our projects that we do as a city has to fit within that vision and plan. And so it's a plan. I'm not sure if you all have done that here, Commissioner, but it's a plan that has tremendous buy-in because there was a significant amount of community participation, stakeholder input. Residents, business owners, everyone had their input into the direction of the city. That vision then became ratified by the commission. The commissioner said, this is our plan for the next 20 years, our vision for the city. So you then have your input, and now every single year you can track what your commission and what your city is doing. And that's a stakeholder-led process that allows you to have a direct input into how your city, how your built environment will look over the next 5 to 10 or 15, 20 years. And again, I would encourage any city to do that. It was one of the first things that I did, even in my former role, where I brought the commissioners together, and we determined what was the vision and mission for the city. And then that became the guiding rule, the guiding document that we did everything.
I have to agree with something that both of them said. In particular, community feedback, participation, being there as an engineer. A lot of what we do in design, which is early on, really needs your input. We need to know where certain restrictions to our design may exist that are unforeseen before we have to go and discover them in an expensive manner. And more importantly, the willingness to pay for the infrastructure and to pay for the improvements. It's too often that communities demand improvements but are completely unwilling to pay for them. Somebody has to pay, and it has to be incremental, or else you're going to make somebody down the line go broke covering for the improvements that should have been made for over 40, 50 years. So those are the two most important things that, in my experience, any public could do to help this overall process.
And with that, now I'm serious. It really is the end. This was terrific, you guys. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
A round of applause for everybody.
Thank you all very much.
He might not want you guys to know this, but he got in at about 2 in the morning last night after a 6-hour delay, and he's been amazing today. Well, that concludes our program for you all today, and I hope all of you have learned
Something you can apply in your own lives. We want to thank everyone who gave us this amazing opportunity and supported our team, even from the early days when this was just a business plan for a small class. I just have to ramble off a bunch of thank yous here, and we're just very excited. Vicki Pugh in the PBA Development Department, Dean Leslie Turner in the Rinker School of Business, President Fleming, Sean Davis, who's been supportive in my life and a lot of other people's life for a very long time, and I just want to say thank you for that. Jeremy Morse, and of course Alexander Golding, who if I hadn't met, we probably wouldn't be here today. Thank you to our amazing sponsors, the Quantum Foundation, Agape Love Foundation, the Knight Foundation, the Community Foundation, Mako Marketing Group, Commissioner Ryan, Startup West Palm Beach, HIP Investor, and all of our media sponsors. Most importantly, thank you to all of the students, all the student team and volunteers who put countless hours of their own free time into this. Thank you for coming, and have a good evening.